We are live. All right. Thank you, everybody. This is the Evil Genius Chronicles Hangout on Air. This is becoming relatively common occurrence, and I am delighted to have our particular panel with us. And let me go around the horn, and let me just tell you who you are, tell you, the listener, who's on, and then if you guys will give kind of a brief self-bio and plugs and links and things like that. Starting from my left, Christiana Ellis, welcome.
Well, thank you. Short bio. Well, I guess I'm a writer and podcaster with a day job as chemical engineer. I have a fantasy novel called Nina Kimberly the Merciless and a radio play called Space Casey that are both available as free podcasts. And then I also do all sorts of other podcasts about a variety of things. And of late, I'm doing a daily 5-minute video blog first thing in the morning called 5 More Minutes. And you can find everything I do at christianaellis.com.
Ding! All right. and with us now, Nutty Nuchtchas, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Nuchtchas, and I am an artist by day and a blogger and podcaster by night. I have the Nutty Bites podcast, which is all about geeky topics, and Dave has been a guest on before, and I show up all over the place on other people's podcasts, and I am also part of Beyond the Wall, which is awesome, and we'll get into that later. Everything can be found at nimlas.org.
And also with us, my dear friend Viv Schubert, the Vivid Muse, welcome.
Hi, how are you guys doing? Like it's a good day, it's a good night?
Yes.
Okay.
We're living the dream.
I'm vamping because Chooch isn't here yet. Windows pooped on his machine, and so he's having to do updates, and he's going to join momentarily. But like the ladies said, we do Beyond the Wall podcast. Also, Christiana, my husband, and I have Consumption that we have yet to resume, and a couple of other podcasts that for Chooch and I have really been kind of stuck by the wayside, Into the Blender. COH podcast still gets the most hits of anything, which I love, and I have a sporadic Girls Rules podcast that I need to talk to my ladies after the show tonight about.
As you know, I am a huge fan of Girls Rule. That's usually early in the year, I have a wish list of inactive podcasts that I want to hear an episode from. That's for several years that has been on my list. It's like, all right, this is what I want for my holiday season or my birthday or whatever. Just give me a new episode of that. And I actually got one of those this year. Michael Gohagen's Real Reviews Radio had like the first episode in 7 years.
Wow.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, and I was still subscribed, and I was like, oh my God, what happened?
It just
All right,
that is so cool. Well, thank you, and you're one of the people that it keeps getting me wanting to do it again, too, so there's certainly a lot of ththings to talk about.
All right, and so is Chooch imminent?
I would have to leave the room to find out.
No, that's fine. Then we will just join with him whenever he comes on. And before we go too far, let us just acknowledge kind of up at the top that there is a gaping hole in this panel. So that we don't have to address it kind of constantly as we go, because we probably could, every 30 seconds otherwise. And that is, we wish PG was here. He is not, and it is a cosmic travesty. He's not. And I guess, I don't want to get too maudlin, but I was so angry with myself. Just as a background of what started all this is I've just started watching Game of Thrones, the TV show. So I'm whatever it is, 4 years behind the entire world. And I'm listening to the Beyond the Wall podcast to coincide with that. So I'm essentially 4 years shifted off of you. Every time I watch an episode, that I then listen to the corresponding episode of the podcast. And it made me so angry that I didn't start this till now, because I cannot tell him how much I enjoy this.
So yeah, he definitely started it off. I actually didn't come in right away, although I think I started in with the group pretty early on. But
episode 2, I think.
Yeah. Well, because I know at least what happened with me is that he put out the first one with the rest of the crew, and I saw it and then just said, oh my God, please let me be on the show.
It's so funny because I
That is
remember
so
you there from the
cute.
beginning.
I know. I don't remember you not there from the beginning, Christiana.
Episodes
I remember.
0 and 1 are it.
Yeah.
Wow. You've just always been there. I don't even remember that.
Well,
I
I
call
think
those the Lyrica years.
right. It's like what happens when they have a TV show that gets a pilot and they decide to pick it up, but then they make a couple of little changes that only show up after the pilot episode.
So you came
you're the
after the pilot.
Okay. So all right. So just because we've got a couple of us and we'll hopefully have another one. I'm going to ask a bunch of these questions that I'll direct them just so that we know who's going to get them. I'll traffic cop these.
Sounds good.
Just as kind of background for each of you, and also as part of the ground rule of this conversation, I'm going to just call everything Game of Thrones rather than differentiate between Song of Ice and Fire and the TV shows and the novel. We're just going to call everything Game of Thrones and not bother with the nomenclature beyond that. So, Christiana, what got you kind of into Game of Thrones in any media, and kind of which media did you hit first?
Well, it was, so I read the books before the show, but it was the fact that they were making the show that is what spurred me to read the books. I'm trying to remember if I had talked to anyone who had read the books before that, and I don't remember for sure. But I was always a fan of all the different TV shows HBO does, and they had earned enough benefit of the doubt from me that pretty much anything they put out, I'll watch at least a couple of episodes of just to see if it's my thing. And when they announced that they were going to do the HBO show, this was still 6 months out, I remember thinking to myself, you know what, maybe what I'll do is I'll read the first book before the season starts. And then I read the first 4 books in a month. So, and at that time, the book 5 was still on its way. So that was the first one that I had to wait for, but even then I didn't have to wait very long compared to the people who were reading all along.
And then Nuchtchas, what was your experience?
Well, all right, so I know we're just referring to this as a Game of Thrones, but as the book reader in me, I have such a hard time because I'm trying not to change the name of the series from A Song of Ice and Fire. This is a series of books that my brother-in-law told me I needed to watch. My brother told me read. My brother told me I needed to read. My sister told me I needed to read. Then one of my best friends told me I needed to read it. Then my husband picked it up while he was in Afghanistan, and we were just dating at that point. And he's like, no, you really need to read this. And he went through all available books, the first 3 books, I believe, while he was in Afghanistan. He's like, you need to read this. And it was so much so that my brother had a D&D character that he had modeled after Sandor Clegane. So I'd already played with that character. And my best friend had a Star Trek character in a role-playing game that he had modeled after Jon Snow. It is very weird to think about now. And so I already had some grasp on some of the characters. And so when my husband came back from Afghanistan, so that was about 2003-ish, he said, you've got to read these. I read the first book, and I don't know, first brand chapter, I'm hooked. They find those wolves, I am hooked. I think the best description is that we tell people, because it's different points of view, you kind of got to give it a couple of chapters, but if you get to the line, the things I do for love, and you're not enjoying it, you're allowed to put it down, which is a great test. So I read through them all. And as I was finishing up the 3rd book, Feast for Crows came out, and I got that right away, and I tore through it, and I was like, this is great, because this book is only half of the book that he wanted to put out, and so the next book will be out really quick, I mean, he's already got it half written.
Right.
So in that time, I reread the books. I looked up everything I possibly could on the fandom. And when I really got into podcasting, I started looking into all of the A Song of Ice and Fire podcasts I could get my hands on. There were about 3 different ones. 2 of them have pod faded. One is Still Going Strong, which is a podcast of Ice and Fire, which started out as very young people, and now they're all adults. It's really funny.
Hey, Choochie.
Hello.
And the other one, which was really good, and I hope it's still out there, was George R.R. Martin's podcast. He had a 10-episode podcast back in the early days of podcasting, and they're fantastic. And they got great stories about writing and what it's like to be a writer in Hollywood and all of this other stuff. So I just ate everything up. And then the HBO series came out, and they were talking about it, and I don't remember how I showed up on PG's radar, but he said, yeah, I'm going to do this podcast with, in my memory, it was Chooch.
That would be me.
Christiana.
You got on his radar for this because you and I had talked a lot about the book series.
Excellent.
And I told him that you knew your shit.
So, and in my memory, Christiana was already on board. And he said, you want to come in? We don't want to make it too many people, but it'd be really great. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I hopped on, and it's been fantastic. It's definitely. I wonder if my fever for the series would be as strong if it weren't for this podcast.
Oh, I know.
But I'm very glad that I've done this, and it's definitely given me new perspective. That's for sure.
All right. And then Viv, how did you get involved?
It's kind of confusing. I've always attributed my ex-husband, but I recently came across a book that I thought was the book he gave me to read that was actually a different book series. But I still think that it was my ex-husband because he was into all that kind of fantasy and, like the Quest, the Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. So I'm pretty sure it had to be him because I started in around book 2. I think I get confused. It's been it's like been 20 years, So the TV show, I was actually like, when I heard about that, I was super hot pissed because I was sure they'd fuck it up. I forgot to ask about language.
You're fine.
Okay.
It's not work safe. It's not kid safe.
Okay.
The rest of the spiel, Dave.
I gotta get better because there's gonna be a grandchild in this house in a couple days. I gotta clean that language up.
We don't speak for our employers don't speak for us. That's the rest of it. There we go.
That's right. But with the TV show initially, I was really angry and like they're gonna screw it up and the casting is gonna suck. And the first name that I heard of casting that made me go was Peter Dinklage as Tyrion, because having seen him he was in the Elf movie where he played the character he played, which was hilarious. But then he also played like a romantic lead on the TV show 30 Rock, and he showed a lot of depth in that, and then something else I'd seen him in. And so I was like, well, that might be good because he's a good actor. And then after that, more names that I recognized came out, and then PG started talking to us about doing this, and we became obsessed.
Not to jump in, but just because you mentioned Peter Dinklage, that was a kind of a turning point for me too. Once I read the books and was hearing about it, just because I had seen him in The Station Agent, which is a great, it's kind of an indie film that he's the lead in, and he was so good in that. And then as I'm reading the books, in my head, it's just like, well, obviously got to be Peter Dinklage, right? And then they announced that it was going to be, and it's like, oh, well, good, I'm on board then.
For me, when I was following, even before this series was announced, and everybody always said the only way it could ever be done on screen is if it was an HBO series, but that's never going to happen. Everybody always suggested Warwick Davis, and I was like, no, he can't act the part. You need to be a really good actor, and I could never figure out who. And when I heard Peter Dinklage, I said, oh, he's way too attractive to be Tyrion.
Yeah, that's true, though.
Nip Tuck as a romantic lead, ensemble, whatever. He was sexy.
Well, and we've actually talked about that before, how kind of uncool it altered the story in the show from the book by having someone so handsome and well known, and you know what I mean? Because in the book he's supposed to look more monstrous, at least by his own descriptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Before we go any farther, let's bring Chooch into this. So Chooch, if you can give us a really quick kind of capsule bio of yourself, and then kind of answer the question of like what was the first, how did you first get into the Game of Thrones world?
Okay. Well, I'm Chooch Schubert. I'm a podcaster, obviously, musician, IT guy, and Game of Thrones. I was actually got into it by Viv, from Viv, introduced to it. I don't know how. I don't know that I had ever heard the name George R. R. Martin until, I don't know,
I
2
foisted
years
it on
before
you.
the HBO announcement.
Mm-hmm.
And it still took a while before I started to read book one.
Well, and you wouldn't have read it. I mean, you would not. I mean, honestly, would you have ever picked it up if I hadn't chosen it as one of our books to read to each other?
No.
Okay.
I mean, eventually, probably, because so many people have talked about it.
Right. Well,
But
now
I don't know how I had never heard of it before that point.
Yeah.
So many people love it, and I have no idea why. And then I started reading it and fell in love with it too, and finished book one, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was like season 3 or 4 of Game of Thrones had aired, and I finally finished book one and stopped there for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Respect.
Well, and just to answer that question for myself, I had a really weird journey through this in that I read Game of Thrones right when it came out, and in fact, I interviewed George R. R. Martin on that book back when I was doing Reality Break. So in fact, I read the book to interview George R. R. Martin, and at the time, I am very, very much not a fantasy fan, to the point where I was kind of bugged because I thought, this guy that wrote Fever Dream and Armageddon Rag and all this other stuff that I loved, now he's writing this fantasy shit. Oh, dear God. But I'm going to read it anyway. I'm like, oh my God, I actually like this one. You know, I've only, like, Lord of the Rings I read once when I was a teenager. I've never been back to it. It's just not my particular, you know, I'm way more in the cyberpunk, Sterling Gibson camp. That's just kind of my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read that when it first came out. I read Clash of Kings. I know that I read Clash of Kings because I remember the Battle of Black River and a lot of that stuff. But I have very little. There's giant parts of that I don't remember. I really should have refreshed my memory. But then I started reading Storm of Swords 4 months ago. So I had basically like a 16-year, 15-year gap between Clash of Kings and Storm of Swords. And there was a day, I remember the day I was going to sit down and read Storm of Swords, and I remember that it was like 2003. And I had the book, and I thought, I'm just not in the mood for something this heavy. And then it was 11 years before I actually got back to reading the book. I started reading Storm of Swords around Thanksgiving. I'm now like halfway through Dance of Dragons. Then at some point I said, well, and the main reason I started reading was because I did not want to get spoiled by the TV show fans who were, I was like, I spent a year and a half going, no, every time we would get to a spoilery thing I didn't want to hear. So I was like, I got to read Storm of Swords no matter what before I get this. Because I know I know a Red Wedding exists, and I don't want to know anything about it, and I'm running out of chances to not learn about it. So I was like, I got to read this shit right now. And then I was like, well, I should be watching the show at some point. So now I'm pursuing the story in 3 different media concurrently. I'm just finishing up reading the comic series, which covers the first novel. I'm in the middle of book 5, and I'm 3 episodes into first season. So I'm like soaking in this story at 3 different points in the story. So it's kind of bizarre.
Like a Time Lord.
Yeah. If you're looking for a fourth way, Tor.com has a great series where they have someone reading through the whole series 2 chapters at a time, where they summarize what happened in those chapters and then give commentary on it. And it's actually a really great series. And they're already midway through book 5, but all of them are archived. So if you were looking for even more commentary on each episode, I can recommend that series. I really enjoy it.
There's actually another way, because I just started, like the other day, started playing the Android game, the Telltale game, which we'll talk about later. But but I made myself angry when I started reading Storm of Swords because I had forgotten how episodic it was. That, I mean, it's not bad. It wouldn't be bad bathroom reading because you have these self-contained, even though they're giant books, it's like 80 chapters of 10-page, 12-page, 15-page chapters. So you could just read one chapter a day and you'd be just fine. I don't know what my problem was that I just didn't feel like diving into a tome, I guess, that one day, and then it cost me a decade of the series, basically.
Well, you actually talk about that on your show, one of the episodes where you say how, you read at night and you're so happy that you have a Kindle because you don't want this tome smashing on your face when you fall asleep. And the funniest thing is I read them all in paperback except for Dance, and that was my exact problem. And so even though I had purchased the hardcover, halfway through reading, I had to go and buy the Kindle just so I could read it in bed because it was so freaking heavy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have all 5 books in hardcover, and I bought the last 3 over again in Kindle just because I found that a superior reading experience. And for somebody who with a very long gap between books, that X-ray feature is absolutely essential for me, because I'm going to tell you that not one chapter. So how many chapters have I read now? We're going to say 200 chapters. Not a chapter has gone by where I didn't use the X-ray feature once, and I probably average 5 to 10 times every chapter. It's like, who was this guy? I don't remember him. Oh yeah, he was that guy. So I have to look up characters constantly, and like just being able to hover over them and do it is just the best thing.
It's like having Tower of the Hand right there in the book for you, which for anybody that's getting confused, towerofthehand.com or westeros.org, you can go in, tell them how far in the series you are, and it prevents you from getting spoilers, and it gives you summaries and all of the information that you need.
Now, before we go much farther, so you guys have kind of touched on it, and I want to just kind of get the story explicitly. What was the formation of this podcast? Let's start with Viv.
I don't know if he talked to you first, Chooch, but PG approached us together most likely about it. And then we had talked about Christiana, and I think the reason I'm so muddy on it is, partly because, memory gaps, but also we had intended for Christiana to be on from the beginning, but I think there was like an email that he thought he sent that she didn't, I don't know. And so he asked if there was anybody else, and I said Nutty, because we talked and she just I was like, this is my girl, she knows it, so that's my memory of it. Chooch, is that close?
Yeah, I was looking through the archives and my mail archives, and the first thing I have is an email from PG between us and Nutty to pick the name.
Mm-hmm.
And that was April 3rd, 2011.
Okay.
And which was like the 17th was the premiere. And they said, "Oh, so yeah, let's do this thing." And then, oh, by the way, there was a teaser behind the scenes thing. Let's record that, and that was released on the day of the premiere, like our episode 0.
Shall we discuss the name, by the way, because that's still an issue.
Yeah.
All right, so we picked Beyond the Wall as our name, and we had our episode out first, and then there was another podcast that came out called Beyond the Wall, and they're still up in iTunes, even though they've pod faded. It was somebody that worked in the industry, so they had access to more of the actors. And I listened to their show, and it was interesting, and the person behind it was definitely trying to keep it going. But was unable to, and it drives me nuts because when we say Beyond the Wall, we're like, yeah, Beyond the Wall, look for the nice art, not a photograph of the wall. Not that their art is bad, it's just we have really nice commissioned art. And I'm so scared that people are going to go off and listen to this other one and go, I didn't hear Nutty in there.
Yeah. Well, then they'll look for you, and then they'll find us.
Or they pod faded. What happened?
Yeah.
And a web search for Beyond the Wall comes up.
Yeah, that might be an iTunes-specific problem, because I know in terms of Google Juice, I've never seen that other podcast, So I don't use iTunes, so
Google Juice.
I have never, until I heard you mention it on episode 2 or 3, I didn't know such another thing existed. So I'm relatively unusual in my complete non-use of iTunes, but at least Google, and you're fine.
I know when we first started on Google, the #1 search was for some Israeli blog or something, Beyond the Wall.
Yeah, it was. That's right. We were like, oh, they're going to be so disappointed. We're talking about a different wall altogether.
So now, given that you have all kind of been soaking in it in different ways, for 4 years with the TV show and the books, and some of us have been, you've been various time lengths up to 18, 19 years with the books. Kind of, what's your feeling at this point for the way the story feels to you in the different media? Let's start with Nutty.
All right, so I still say that Game of Thrones, the TV series, is one of my favorite adaptations of a book ever. It is the closest to the source material that I have seen. I think The Watchmen then came out afterwards, and that definitely is another good one. There are definitely a lot of differences, and for some book readers, I know that they have a hard time accepting those differences. For me, if I want to read the books, they're still there, and I can read them. And I have fun with the differences. Some of them annoy me. Some of them I'm fine with. And as you'll listen to the podcast, I get more and more fine with the changes as we go along. I think that there's some things that the show has been able to explore that the books have not. For instance, we've gotten a lot of really great scene between characters that don't have point of view chapters. And that's been fascinating for me. Whereas there's certain things, certain subtleties that the show can't do because you're not inside somebody's head, and you don't have that unreliable narrator thing going on. So I definitely enjoy them. I will always rank the books higher. But again, I still think that part of my experience for the show is clouded by doing the podcast, because I have such an emotional connection now.
Yeah, Viv, what's your take on the various media that you consume this in?
I love the books. I have actually just, I'm rereading book 4 now using the Kindle version. I haven't been able, I usually reread the books before the season starts, but with my health problems, reading is not as fundamental. So the Kindle, like you were saying, is such a great tool for me. Using the notes and the highlight function is like how I leave my little reminders, kind of like you use the X-ray. And so I'm able to read it again. And there's something about the way he writes that I just absolutely love. Wow. Hot Chooch.
All right.
But
okay. I'm sorry. If you've got more, please go.
But as far as the TV show is, I'm so much more emotionally hit on visuals. The TV show, honestly, if we weren't doing this podcast, I might have pulled the plug at the Red Wedding, because the changes that they made from the book just broke me. So, because as Nettie says, the love of getting together and all that stuff, I may have pulled the plug, because I pull the plug on series when they get too below the belt, and that was just awful. And so the way that they amp it up for us book readers, they really do a great job, because they shocked me as much as Chooch seeing the Red Wedding, having never read about it. But it's a lot harder to take too, for some of us that are more visually attuned like that. So still good stuff though.
All right, Chooch, what do you feel? So of everyone in here, you're the only person who got the TV show first.
Right, I had started the book a few months before the show started.
Oh, okay.
And finished it after like episode 3 or 4 had aired. And then was going to jump into number 2, and then realized, wait a minute, I should probably stay unspoiled and stay with the TV perspective, since everybody else had read all of them at least once.
Yeah, it's given us a nice perspective, I think, a different perspective, with him being, he knows the voice of George's writing because he read the first book, but otherwise he's just taking it as an unknown, doesn't know what's coming kind of a situation.
And I get to come up with totally harebrained theories of what I think's going to happen. They can look at me and say, wow, you're an idiot, or whoa,
No.
where did that come from?
I think it's always interesting.
Or ooh, with Nutty's famous poker face.
Yes, my poker face of For the audio people, I'm just covering my face.
It's
Part
like
of the way through the show, we switched from recording on Skype to doing it Google Hangouts on air, so people could watch us. And so Chooch is coming up with these theories, and I'm just covering my mouth.
and she forgot that we could see her.
Oh, I didn't forget. I just knew that otherwise everything I was thinking was going to be right there. So I just covered my mouth. And it's so great because I think one of my favorite things in the later seasons will be we'll talk about something and then one of us or all of us will say, "So what do you think, Chooch?"
Right.
And he's like,
It's like luring him down the path of making the absolute wrong guess, but it's
Well, there'll be
awesome.
things that did not stick out to me in the slightest, and they're like, "What do you think about that?" I'm like,
Yeah.
they said it.
Yeah, I was just. I think the fact that you hadn't read the books gave us a really nice dynamic of mostly taking the show at face value and talking a little bit about like what differences there might have been with the books, only in the context of what's happened up to that point, but staying away from being too spoilery or assuming that everyone has read the books, because I think that made us probably more listener friendly as well, because there's probably lots of people listening who've only watched the show and not read the books.
Mm-hmm. And so, Christiana, also, so then what's your kind of feeling of the various media?
Well, I feel like I'm always the adaptation apologist, not necessarily in this group, but just in general, because I've always felt that when you're adapting a story from one medium to another, it's a huge mistake to make it too slavish an adaptation. I feel like different mediums have different strengths, and to get the best result out of each version, you should play to that medium's strengths as a priority above preserving the perfection of, one-to-one correlation in the different versions. So I like, honestly, when they change stuff. And especially I like thinking about why they might have made certain changes. Just for example, in the show, one of the reasons they're going to make certain changes is because in a book it's easy to have a character disappear for 2.5 books and just not come up until he suddenly returns as a surprise. But in the show you've got an actor who you want to either let him go off and do other things, or you want to be able to keep him on set doing stuff, and so they might make a change for that. And so I like the changes a lot, and so I don't really choose one or the other as much as I enjoy both and how they're different.
Mm-hmm. For myself, bearing in mind that although I had read the books, I had this kind of, they're kind of like ancient touchstones. Like, so I can hear, you're talking about specifics in the, as I'm listening to this first season, you're talking about things that are different. Like Silvio not being bald. It's like I would never have remembered that he was bald. So the level of detail that I bring to this, I really kind of bring. It's almost impressionistic the way I remember those first 2 books, because it's so long ago that I read them, that I remember things exist, but I really couldn't tell you anything specific about them. But for example, the first time we got a shot of the wall, that was one of those cases where what they put on the screen was better than what was in my imagination, and I thought it was more visceral, and it hit me so much harder. I've been reading 4.5 books about this thing, and just looking at it and like looking at the guy standing on top of it, so tiny, I was like, oh my God! It felt very different to me, and it kind of, rather than one of those things where it ruins the book, it actually amplified the book to me.
Right. Mm-hmm. I had the same reaction to the wall. It was way, 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 way bigger than I could have ever perceived of. And of course they have CGI to make that shit happen. But
Yeah.
I also felt similarly disappointed about the Jesus Christ, I'm blanking on the damn throne name.
Throne?
The Iron
Throne.
Jesus, don't fire me. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. But and there have been actually sketches, and he's actually come out with a sketch showing the throne as he always imagined it, which was like this really dangerous, sharp, metallic thing that you had to climb and sit on, and it was extremely painful, and literally 1,000 swords. So I was disappointed in that, but I mean, like the wall just was jaw-dropping. It was amazing,
Mhm.
and you had so many other neat creatures in the north to keep you happy too. It was just lovely.
Mhm.
The Iron Throne example I think is really interesting because while if you were coming into the show with the expectation of the way it's described in the book, it does seem like, oh, well, that's just a lot smaller and simpler than what I had envisioned, and it's easy to be disappointed by it, and that's a completely valid response. And yet, if you think about the TV show as a cultural phenomenon, that throne that they did for the show is iconic. It's all over the place. It's everywhere. You know, you see photos. It's on the cover of Entertainment Weekly. You see people posing on replicas of it.
Well, and they certainly couldn't have toured with the one that we all might have envisioned from the actual books. You couldn't have thrown that behind glass or had kids pose on it or anything. You know?
And here we have what happens all the time. Christiana saying exactly what I'm thinking.
Well, it just illustrates kind of what I was saying earlier, which is that it's valid to feel like, oh, well, the way I envisioned it here is different than here, and you might even have a preference for one over the other. But recognizing that the one that they decided on for the show became so effective for the people watching the show, as the people watching the show as a priority over the subgroup of people who watching the show who also read the books.
Yeah, they would never have asked the Queen to sit on the Iron Throne if it was done as sketched, which they did this year. She declined. She said she had one of her own. But when she visited set, they asked, would you like to sit on it? And they would never have asked her that if she had to climb, 3 flights of stairs just to get to the throne.
True.
So amongst us here in the group, so Chooch, you at this point you've read the first 3 books, is that right? And you're holding back until we.
What?
Chooch is underwater.
Oh, sorry, I stopped at the first book.
Oh, so you've never read past the first book?
Yeah.
Okay. For some reason I thought you were reading a book behind, but so okay.
I thought about it and just had decided just to stay totally out.
Gotcha. Okay, so for everybody else, so this answer is very easy for you. Do you have a favorite book in the series? Because I know I've been reading some complaints where people. So for me, it's almost like I'm reading one giant book because of the way I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But some people are complaining, particularly the way books 4 and 5 segment the characters, so there are characters that you don't see, and I've read complaints on that. And so are there some that kind of made you happier or less happy? Let's put it that way. Some that made you happier or less happy to read. Christiana?
Well, a little bit like how you described it, I tend to think of it as one big story and less like individual books. But that said, I feel like as standalone books, or even just as considered each novel as a separate thing, I feel like the book 3, Storm of Swords, has the best stuff in it. It's just like there's more. There's so many huge things that happen just one after another. You have to get halfway into the book for that to start happening, but after that, it's just this roller coaster ride for the whole rest of the book of these jaw-dropping things happening. And so I'm not enjoying the ones subsequent to that, but I feel like book 3 is the one that's the most exciting.
Mm-hmm. And Nuchtchas?
For me, Game of Thrones will always hold a special place in my heart. The first book, I really do enjoy how it's contained. Book 3 is probably a really good one as well, so I don't know where each ranks. I didn't have as big a problem with the splitting of the 2 books as other people did, and I think part of the problem that a lot of people have is that they waited for so long and they spent so much time speculating that nothing could have lived up to their expectations. And because they had spent, 11 years or 10 years without reading about Jon Snow, they felt deprived.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my computer's doing a whole bunch of weird things. Sorry about that. All of a sudden,
Just
all
our
my
usual
account things
madness.
started popping up. So I think that I didn't have such a big problem with it, but I know a lot of people did. And again, I think part of it is that I'm able to recognize when I'm anticipating something and I'm able to lower my expectations. But my plan is, and there is a reading order out there. There's a reading order that takes the last two books and puts each of the point of view characters in chronological order. So I want to read that and see how that actually flows. But I have a feeling, my hypothesis is that it's a better story in each book contained. So
Hmm.
I'll let everybody know once I finish that experiment.
Okay.
But there's really no books that I can say I didn't like. I mean, there are
Mhm.
pieces of them, but I mean, so many people complained about Feast because they said that all the boring characters were there, but you had all those. I, no real spoilers, but you had great Cersei chapters, and you had all of these point of views that you didn't have before, and there was so much in there. Just because Jon Snow's not in it, it's still a good book.
And I didn't disclaim this enough. I should probably do this like every 10 minutes as if we were on radio since viewers are coming in and leaving. But this is lousy with spoilers. In fact, I should put that in my lower third. Lousy with spoilers. So
Only
if you
to
want
only
to
up to
spoil,
where the TV show is, though. We don't go beyond where the TV show
Mm.
is because of Chooch.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
Although that's
So-
going to get harder and harder with
Well,
they're planning to
yeah.
deviate more from the
Oh my
books and
God.
I'll have to be very
overlapping.
careful. Okay, I'll have to think very hard. So stop me if I
Oh,
throw
we'll
the brakes
stop.
on if I start to get into something. So Viv, do you have a book that jumps out at you more than others?
It would definitely be. I have not, in full disclosure, I have not read book 5 because of my health problems, reading being difficult. And PG had me start with book 3 instead of book 1, and so finished 3, working on 4. I'm eventually going to get to Dance with Dragons, but I'm just keeping up now with the show at this point. I my favorite is probably book 1, possibly book 2. It would be one of those two though, because they were so. I'm such a sap. There's so much more hope, and everybody's young, and it still looks like things could turn around, guys. Even though there's 5 more books coming, and there's gonna be hell and pain, but Arya was still so young, and Bran could walk, and blah blah blah. It's just they 3 and 4 for me are just like a trudge, kind of like. There are secondary characters. We lose John for all that stuff is going to be okay with the TV show. They'll still have him his chest showing and bare shirted and whatnot. But I mean, it would have to be one of the earlier 2 books, and I cannot give an opinion on book 5 yet.
If I had to pick one, I would be with Christiana. I would think that Storm of Swords. I think would be. I liked it even better than the first 2. I honestly, for the people that hate that are haters on it, I would probably put Feast for Crows as my number 2. I thought both of those books. I think the series is actually getting stronger as it goes, and I can't really speak to Dance with Dragons. Now, some of this might be if I went back and reread from the beginning, I might feel differently. But you know how I'm almost the opposite of the way nostalgia works, where you kind of, time kind of weathers it, and you only kind of remember the really stark things about no pun intended, but you remember you lose a lot of the little details and you remember the big picture, and so you tend to think about things better in the past because you can't remember the things you didn't like about them so much.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, though, it's actually the stuff that's more recent and more fresh. As I'm reading along, I'm thinking, boy, this is picking up steam.
Yeah.
So I liked each one better. And the thing that was driving me crazy is, so bearing in mind that I didn't have to deal with it, but with the publication history, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, is there any reason why they couldn't, other than the fact that they want to make them a cohesive book, they're so episodic that they could just say, well, we got 30, let's release a book. Let's take a month. We've got these 30 chapters. Let's take a month, and if you want to put a prologue and an epilogue on it, or do any kind of shimming and filling in a little bit, let's release this, and then just keep on writing. I don't know why this isn't like a 15-book series. Yes.
I have an answer for that.
Okay.
George does not write linearly. The way that he writes is he's constantly going back and forth between his chapters, and he doesn't actually fully arrange them until he's ready. And this is why. He has a plan, and he has a way that he wants to lay them out, and it ends up changing frequently. For Dance, there was a certain John chapter that was a spoiler chapter that was read at various cons, and over the last 3 years that they were releasing it, it changed so drastically. And he was constantly going back and rewriting it and fixing it and tweaking it till it worked the way that he wanted it. So it's the way that he writes. If he were another writer that wrote in chronological order, you could do that.
Yeah, see, it's funny that you say it like he has a plan, because what immediately came to mind is that he has a plan like the Cylons had a plan with BSG.
Yeah.
But I'm ching, right? Yeah, I think it would be really interesting if it ended up released like a serial or something. Although I think that's just clearly not going to happen at this point. But that would be an interesting way to tell this kind of story, because you're right that the chapters are so episodic, and you're jumping back and forth between different characters. It might be a long time before you circle back around. I wonder if that's maybe part of the. It's like a little bit what Nutty was saying. People who don't like Feast for Crows might just be more of the people who did have to wait longer for it, and then waiting long again for the next book, because it just meant that some of your favorite characters who aren't in 4, you've already waited a long time to find out what happens to them, and then they're not even in book 4, which you waited for years for, and then you have to wait more years. Like, how long was it in between book 3 and book 5 before you got to see what Jon Snow was up to again, and what Tyrion was up to after everything that happens at the end of 3, right? I mean, so I can understand people getting frustrated by that, and that translating to a dislike for the book. But I agree. I think it's underrated. I think there's a lot of great stuff in 4, and in particular, I'm a big fan of the stuff in Dorne and the Sand Snakes. I think it gets bad rap.
Well, look, I don't mean to imply that I didn't love 3 and 4, but you know me, it's like seeing, Battle of the Five Armies. I'm never going to want to watch the war movies. I want to watch the other ones. They're still excellent, and as books, I think they're far better than the series, as great as the series is. But I guess I didn't realize that 3 and 4 had been taking so much shit. Makes me feel sad for them.
I don't think 3 does. I think 4 is the one that gets the most.
It's pretty dark, if I remember.
Yeah, which surprised me.
Well, I think.
I thought it was a really strong book. Having just read it.
Right.
Having finished it weeks ago.
Well, we don't have anyone here who can really speak for the people who didn't like it, I guess.
I also think we don't have anyone here that had to wait those 4 or 5 years in between 3 and 4.
Right.
I mean, I had been reading for so long, but while 4 was coming out is when I was reading 1, 2, and 3, so I was able to jump into 4 very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same for me.
I had a divorce lag. It was a long time between 3 and 4 for me.
I think when I've heard people complain about 4, I think it's just a matter of not liking the way it's split up, so you don't get to find out what's happening to some of your characters, and feeling like the new characters that we get POVs for instead of those characters, people feel are an inadequate replacement. So they feel like, why are we hearing about these new people when we could be hearing about Tyrion, for example? Mm-hmm. And I think so when people complain about 4, I think that's the gist of it, which I get, but didn't feel the same way.
It's totally fair. It's fair when you're a TV watcher. Mm-hmm. It's bullshit when you're a book reader.
So let me ask, given that you guys are kind of somewhat experts and more experts, one of the things that I kind of struggled with, it wasn't until this recent push, so I read the first 2 books without ever much thinking about this, is kind of taking not the geography of Westeros, because it's not shaped like Europe, right, and the Middle East, because it's, rather than being kind of short and wide, it's skinny and tall, but I started starting putting a little bit of analogs on there made it easier for me to think about. So, for example, I started thinking about Stark territory and the northern parts as, say, Scandinavia, and Dorne as, say, Spain, and trying to kind of put things into that sort of framework, because I had in my head this whole winter is coming, but winter's not coming for everybody. Winter's
Right.
only coming for some people.
Mhm.
And like, there's even parts of the Seven Kingdoms that are not, that this is not life or death for.
Right.
And so it took me to kind of actually sit down and try to think a little bit more about that. And clearly like Astapor and all these things are Egypt or somewhere near Egypt. They almost might as well just call them Egypt for how Egyptian they are. So, do you guys do you think about it in that way? And can you kind of help me put in some analogs? Start with Viv.
I just constantly go back to the maps, and I just learn that world. That's just my thing, is that and it even became more acute after we played it was the Game of Thrones board game that I was like really obsessively like, okay, I got to know the fingers are where, because it was part of winning the goddamn game. But I found that during my reread, I keep going back to the maps, because that's, for me to mix it with something else would make me have confusing leaps of comprehension on it later.
And Nuchtchas, how about you?
For me, it's more associating them with cultures for sure, and George definitely drew on a lot of history for a lot of his analogies there. For me, although it's kind of changed slightly, again, this podcast has changed that. The North is Canada. And having living here, yes, it is.
Yes.
Especially because after you go past a certain point, it's
zombies.
Yeah,
It's frozen zombies.
No, I'm not going to call the people up at alert zombies, but yeah, it's pretty bad. Actually, alert could be Craster's Keep. Oh, sorry guys. Anyway.
Wait, I was born in Fairbanks. That's below the wall or above the wall?
Fairbanks.
Alaska. Is that?
Oh yeah,
What's the cutoff?
You'd be like, when the map starts to disappear.
That's me.
Off Eastwatch, yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I didn't know you were born in Alaska. So that's definitely in the north for me. What's his name? The Greyjoys. They're Vikings. The Dorne, they're like North African kind of a feel for me.
Morocco, maybe.
Yeah,
Algeria.
that sort of a thing. And,
Mediterranean or something.
For me, especially in the books, although it's different in the show, the Horse Lords were the Dothraki. They were Mongolian. They were East Asian. They were very different.
You might as well call them Mongols again. They're so they're so clearly in that mold that there's
And if you look at their history and everything, and I'm gonna name drop that other podcast again, Podcast of Ice and Fire. The producer, that was one of her biggest beeps, is that they did not cast an Asian person because that's where her family is from. So it really bothered her. But I totally agreed with that assessment. So for me, that's definitely Eastern. And it's funny. I say that the North is Canada, but the wildlings, a lot of them are they're Celts to me. Definitely Celts, especially with like the kissed by fire thing, and that being lucky, and
wasn't that like her accent too?
Yeah, they definitely played that up. So it's a lot of that. I think like the King's Landing area and the main central part of Westeros, that's more European. You've got England mixed in with some Italian and some German, and it all depends on which house and which character. To me, heck, Robert Baratheon might as well be Centauri, so what's that, Italian? There you go.
I think he's like so clearly like Falstaff.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
All right, Christiana, how about you? Do you have kind of a mental model to help you with
Well,
this?
I think I'm maybe not the best person to ask because when I read, I don't know, I'm not a very visual thinker maybe. So I find that I do not form strong mental pictures of people or places when I read a book. I mean, like I'll get it, but I don't have this vivid portrait in my head. So like this idea that people all say, "Oh, that's not what I imagined this character looking like." I'm like, I don't know. I didn't really imagine them looking like anything. That's just not how it works in my head generally. So now that I've been watching the show, that's just completely taken over. So that's how I see all of those places now, is how they're depicted on the show. One of the differences, though, for example, is that King's Landing in the show is portrayed as a much warmer climate. It's it's almost tropical, certainly Mediterranean, like maybe Greece or something like that. And I guess I would have thought of it more like a default, medieval London type place otherwise. But yeah, otherwise though, I mostly just go by what it looks like on the show because I don't form a strong mental picture otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And Chooch, how about you? Do you have any kind of shortcuts?
I'm the exact same way as Christiana. When I'm I'm not that visual, and I tend to just roll with it. And I'm the same way pretty much with movie adaptations and television, and things change different forms and characters change appearance or whatever, and generally doesn't. I just kind of roll with whatever the new thing is. They don't have much permanence.
Mm-hmm. So now let me jump back into the show a little bit. Did you guys, when you started doing the show, did you have any idea that it would have the shelf life that it would? Like, would you have anticipated me doing what I'm doing with your show? Did you think of it as a timely thing or a long-lived thing? I'll start with Chooch this time.
To me, my assumption would be more of a timely thing, and run out of content and you're done.
Yeah, Christiana, what about you? Did you have anything in mind, or you were just kind of playing it week to week?
Well, what I'm reminded of is that I have a long-running podcast about Survivor that I do with a friend of mine, just called Talking About Survivor, and we've been doing it since, I guess, fall 2006. But even to date, the way I approach the show is I'm more or less just recording a phone call that I would have had with him otherwise.
Right. It's just a conversation.
I hope that people like it, but it's really almost more for us than for anybody else. And so that's kind of how I approach it. And so that's a little bit like, I have the benefit on this show of not having to do the production myself, which is kind of a nice vacation from a lot of the other shows that I do.
Sucks to be Chooch.
But anyway, I certainly think of it like the primary audience as being the people who are watching the show live with us. It's kind of like the same people who read the recaps on AV Club or something like that for a show you're watching, and it's kind of the modern equivalent of water cooler talk. But at the same time, one of the great things about just the medium is that it does stay around, so people can go back and do it, like what you're doing now of going through it, later. And it's a fun, kind of a neat time capsule that way. And again, just to kind of tie it back to PG, it's also just kind of like it's a chronicle. There's records of the fun conversations we had.
And Nuchtchas, how did you have any visions of long life?
Well, as an avid podcast listener, I actually didn't start podcasting, like producing a podcast myself, until January of the same year that we started Beyond the Wall. And so for me, podcasts have always been kind of time capsules for me. They've always been evergreen, even when they're supposed to be timely. For me, they're there for whenever you're ready to get into something. And I remember when we were starting, and people would say, "Oh, I don't have HBO," or "Oh, I don't like watching shows weekly. I'll just watch it all when it's done." And even then, from the beginning, I would say, "Well, the episodes will be there for you once you finished, once you're ready for them. So, and I've always been able to have that idea in my head. And over the years, there have been quite a few people that they're like, oh, I'm just getting into Game of Thrones. I'm like, okay, well, go on and listen to the podcast. And I get people will tell me, they're like, oh, so I just listened to this episode and I just listened to that episode. And it turns out both Christiana and I have voice twins on another radio show that one of my friends told me. It's like, you guys kind of remind me of these people from this other show. I'm not mentioning the name because we mock it incessantly. Not for the voices, but for the content. And so it's kind of neat to see that. So I definitely have that idea, but when I'm recording it, I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, okay, so this is what happened.
Yeah.
This is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
which is kind of fun. It's good energy, I think.
And Viv, how about you?
Everything that they said, except for, and I think Chooch may agree with this, it always surprises me when people will listen to our podcast, which is on average a 2-hour episode for every 1-hour episode that fucking HBO shows. We get on and we just go beep, 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 and we're so excited and we challenge each other. And what was the
2 hours, sometimes 3.
There was one that was 3 hours, but there was one where Christiana actually questioned whether or not we were stupid or something like that.
Was that the
phenomenal.
half hand?
I think what I actually just said was, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah. No, it's so fun. It's like, it's that water cooler conversation with other people that love it just as much as you, that are willing to sit there and keep going, and Christiana's tired and Luna needs to go to the bathroom and all these things happen and we're like, oh yeah, but just one more thing, and it's just too fun not to do, even missing PG, our podcasting sugar daddy. It's not easy because I know we all miss him and we all think of him, but we did a tribute show for him. We're going to do we're throwing a homecoming new media, dance for him at Balticon, and we're going to celebrate him every chance we get. But I know he wants us to keep talking about the show and all that stuff. And Dave, you said earlier how you were kind of incensed that you're now coming to it, and that there were these conversations that you could have had with him that you never had, and dang it, and all that kind of thing. Well, so like when I talk about I never read book 5, he and I never talked about book 5. I have no idea what his insights are for that book. It's just going to be the first book that I don't have any of his opinions on. So like I've said to other people, no matter how much time you spend with somebody or how many conversations you have, there's always going to be one more that you wish you could have had, and that's the beautiful thing about the people that we meet in this community. Sorry for rambling.
No, that's fine. Yes, for me, so I have basically in my TV watching life, I have a 4-year hole, right, where starting for obvious reasons in January 2001, everything stopped for years and years, and to the point where, it is ridiculous. If I pulled up the Evernote document with the seasons of TV, now we're not talking about episodes, we're talking about seasons of TV I want to watch. I've actually got them ordered, like what I want to watch, just in the idea, because we can do this now, I think of the season as a unit, right? So I watched Justified season 1, and then I watched Mad Men season 1, and I don't even think about intermingling them. It's like I'm just gonna ride this one until I'm done with it. So I had, I believe at last count, 110 seasons of television I wanted to watch, and at this point, I watched, I think, 6 in the last year. So we're looking at, conceivably some chunk of my, unless I pick up this pace, some chunk of my remaining life just to get through what I've already trying to make up from the last, 6 or 7 years.
Right.
So
I'm sure you're still adding to the list.
Yeah, well, they're still making them.
Well, my dad has something he always says about that kind of thing, and when he first said it to me, it was about books in particular, but it really applies to all of these things, which is, it's easy to start getting frustrated because you don't have time to read all of the books you would like to read, But what you have to do is just switch your perspective. It's not that you don't get to read all of them, it's that you will never run out.
Mhm.
Aww, I like that.
That is a great way of putting it. I am going to keep that in my noggin from now on. And Dave, don't worry, you'll get sick at some point, and you'll be able to get through a few of them.
Yeah.
On Penn Sunday School, he talked about like having to get some kind of like having to be in the hospital for 2 days, and how happy he was that he had those 2 days with like no, where he couldn't, where he had visitors precluded from some chunk of the time, and he had to just sit there with books and his iPad, and I have a certain empathy for that point of view.
Yeah.
I do the same thing with television and with video games, but I tend to binge entire series. So like I just started watching The Wire and powered through season 1 in a week and started season 2 immediately.
And this is separate from when we binge, because like we're doing our like 2 or 3 other show binges as well. You and all your long commutes, poor thing.
I pulled it up, so I'm just going to read you. So I have a giant thing where they're not ordered. These are just the ones I've got ordered, like in my prioritization list of what I'm going to get to. Arrow season 1. I watched the first 2 episodes. I haven't watched the rest of them yet. Eastbound and Down season 1, Orange is the New Black season 1, Justified season 4, Louie season 1, Friday Night Lights season 1, Deadwood season 1, Orphan Black season 1, Shield season 1.
Deadwood and Orphan Black have to shoot to the top.
I would agree with that. I think that's worthwhile.
Well, good. Shield season 1, House of Cards, Treme season 1, Mad Men season 3, Far Escape season 1. And I'm probably going to put Justified seasons 5, because Justified to this point is Justified is the one I basically have been watching it in conjunction. I watch one of those, something else, Justified, because I love Justified so much.
Oh, it's so great. It's in its last season now. I've been watching it with, just emotions. Although one of those emotions is actually there's a little bit, tied to feeling like you don't have time to watch everything. There's a little bit of when it's done, it'll be a relief. You know what I mean? Not because I am, like I want it to go away, but just so if it can actually come into a nice landing and then just be done and I can get closure with it, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I'll say about your list is for Arrow in particular. I didn't care for the first 4 or 5 episodes of Arrow very much, and I stopped watching it initially, but it did get substantially better from there. People told me that it did, so I gave it another shot, and they were right.
I am actually trying to keep up with. I had to drop Gotham because I found it impossible to watch 4 TV shows at the same time. So I'm
Did
down.
You like
I'm
it
watching. I've never seen it. I had to delete it off the DVR
because
my DVR filled up.
I stopped watching Gotham.
So currently, I am watching The Flash, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Agent Carter, and Constantine. Although I almost am not watching Constantine because I have episodes back to November on my DVR that I haven't gotten to yet. And then I started recording iZombie. We'll see whether or not I actually get to it. I read the whole comic series, but we'll see if I'm able to. I feel so pathetic that there are 4 shows a week and I cannot stay current with them. It's so hard.
Well, I mean, you have a young one too. I mean, there is other responsibilities that you have to take care of. It's okay.
No, you're more current than I am. You're more current than I am. I'm a full-blown cord cutter, and for the first couple of years that I had cut the cord, I was trying to keep up with shows through the various apps that the television stations offered, and you really can. But I got to the point where I'm like, yeah, I can't. It's too much stress and anxiety. Yeah. And right now, the only thing that I am current with is Game of Thrones. And the only other things that I have gotten current with are Netflix produced. So or released new. So The 100 and Orange is the New Black, simply because boom, they're there.
I can't tell you. So I'll get this back to the end of the digression here. But once Netflix starts releasing the Marvel series this summer or the spring, like when they start with Daredevil, it's going to get real because I might have some reprioritization to do because I'm looking so forward to these because, frankly, those are some of my favorite Marvel series, of recent times, and I've never followed. I hate so much when they do comic book event things like the big crossovers. I read every single Shadowland ones when that came out, like all the Daredevil stuff and all the, basically everything in like Hell's Kitchen and the shitty parts of New York. I was way into that, so I'm way into that. I'm probably more excited about those than I was when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. came on TV.
Agreed.
I certainly am, just in the sense of even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I like a lot, but I feel like the street level crime fighting is something that I would like to see done in the superhero mold. Like, to compare it to Gotham, Gotham is well made for what it is, but I stopped watching it because I just decided that watching a superhero show with no superheroes in it is not very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I'm at with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I only watch it peripherally when Chooch watches it. That and Agent Carter and Sleepy Hollow. A lot of them have fallen off my radar, and I'm only picking up a little bit here and there from Chooch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love about The Flash is that, especially for DC things, think about all the DC shows that try so hard to avoid the source material. Just drives me insane.
Yeah.
And it's the one that gave the source material a big sloppy French kiss.
Yeah. Well, and The Flash is just so fun in a way that a lot of these other shows are not. Even Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I still really like, but there was a bit where they're all just hanging out in Star Labs and they're commenting on how something weird just happened and then realizing how weird their lives are generally. And then Cisco is like, we have a guy in our basement who can turn himself into poison gas. and then one of the other characters who's new to this is like, really? And he's like, dude, that was week 3, which is a fun week. Fun week because that was the episode.
Yeah, that's what I like. And I love the trope of the fact that Cisco gives every supervillain their name. I love that so much. Because that's one of the things where this guy that kind of came in from nowhere as one of my favorite parts of the whole show. So now, the digression over. Let's get really, really serious. I started thinking about this when I started thinking about you guys talking about this. Originally, I was going to ask you for the dichotomy of the characters that you love and hate, but then I realized that's not really a dichotomy. It's really a trichotomy, because you've got the characters you love, right, that you feel strongly empathetic towards. You've got the ones you hate, and then the ones you just don't care about. So and this will bum some of you out. I know it. I have a character. There's a character that every time I see that this character is the point of view character, I just go, okay, I got another 15 pages.
Well, say it. Who is
That's
it?
Bran.
Oh, I'm okay with that. He depresses me. He
Bran,
can't walk. He makes me sad.
Well, Bran and most of all, Samuel Tarly.
Yeah.
Every time he's the POV character, I think, okay, well, I guess I got somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes with this. All right, we'll do what we can.
You don't oh man. See, I really
Go ahead and start. If you can answer the 3, Viv, you can take it first.
Okay, who I love the most is probably, I would be shocked if no matter who's standing at the end of book 7, I think Arya is just going to be my favorite. I just it's done. Who do I hate? I mean, that's kind of an easy one. The Mountain, people that are doing it, you kind of have to throw a bone to the politics of it and people being cool, but for him, the Mountain, more so than Sandor, I think, was just evil. He was just fucking twisted, and he needed, he just needed to go away somewhere and stop doing bad things. So he's easy to hate. But what was the other one? The one you love, the one you
just
hate?
Not care about. Who just kind of you feel just nothing for, or just kind of bores you when there's
Dario Naharis. Dario. Yeah. He puts me to sleep every time. Every time he's on screen, it's like, oh, yeah. I don't know. I just.
Okay, Joss, how about you?
Okay, so this is kind of interesting. All right, so first I want to address your boredom for Bran and Sam. Uh, Many book readers are bored with Bran, and many book readers hate that first chapter, that it's a Bran chapter, not the prologue, but the first chapter. I love Bran, and I was in love right from the
Hmm.
beginning. But we can
Yeah.
still be
How
friends.
could you
If you
not be?
told me you didn't like the Queen of Thorns or something, I was ready to say we can't be friends anymore.
That'd be something.
Um, no, I definitely have a lot of common favorites. I mean, Arya is definitely up there. I feel a very strong connection to her. Um, I love Dany. There are times when I hate Dany. And I don't want to get too deep into that because that starts to get into spoiler territory. But there's some really awesome, great things with Dany too. Um, I really liked John when I first started reading it, but as I went and read through the books, I realized there's so many more interesting characters over John, and sometimes I just want to smack him.
Yes, thank
But
you.
there are some really great scenes with John. Because of John, we meet people like Sam, we meet people like Ygritte, we meet Mance Rayder and all of this great stuff, who is so different in the series, and that's something I have a difficulty with. I love Tywin. Tywin is fantastic. I hate him, but I love him, you know. Cersei, when she's crazy, is just fantastic. Give me crazy Cersei. I am all over that. Oh, and of course Tyrion. Tyrion is obviously a favorite. I
I was
think
gonna say I can't believe nobody's brought up Tyrion
no,
yet.
no, no, no. He's definitely there. But I mean, I love little characters, you know, like, well, and some little characters end up getting point of views, you know. But you know, Barristan the Bold, yeah, give me more of him. You know, in the books, I really didn't care so much about Ser Jorah. The series made me care.
Mhm.
The series made me care, and the actor that plays him made me care. So
Aw.
that's definitely there. Who don't I just don't care about? That's a tricky one because I get really into it because I've reread some things, and so there were characters that I didn't care. Like for instance, when I first started reading, I was like, oh, when is this Sansa chapter going to be over with? And I
Mhm.
know that hurts Viv because Viv loves Sansa, but as I reread,
She's grown into a badass.
I started to really get the complexities of Sansa's character, and I realized that there was so much more, and not just the Sansan stuff. I mean, like, she's very complex, and it's definitely worth reading. You know, just because if you want to write a strong female character, she doesn't have to be Wonder Woman. She has to be complex, and that's what Sansa is. So I just I think the ones that bore me I can't think of because I just don't think of them that much. I'm
Mhm.
not a big fan of Dario in the books at all. I think that she's stupid for even considering him or thinking of him,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I just don't get it.
Mhm.
And I
Well,
hope I
that
didn't spoil you, Dave, because now I'm realizing you might not be there.
All right, Christiana, how about you?
So favorite characters: Arya, Tyrion, uh, Daenerys. Although kind of like has already been said, she is frustrating on occasion, but still always one of the chapters that I'm most eager to read. Is what's up with the Daenerys this time. Um, I like Davos a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
mm,
even though his chapters are not always the most exciting, but I just love him as a character, as a person.
Mhm.
Love Davos.
Brienne.
Brienne. That's the name I was waiting for from you.
And Jamie's chapters. I like Jamie's POV chapters a lot too. Um, Characters that you hate, as in love to hate, sort of thing. Obviously, you got Ramsay Snow, who's thoroughly awful. Joffrey, of course, was terrible. Like there's no shortage of characters that are awful people in the best possible way in this book. Certainly, I think Ramsay Snow has the top spot for me at the moment. As far as characters I don't care about, there's not a lot, but I would say I don't really care about Stannis very much. I mean, obviously sometimes the things he does matter to other characters, and so I care about him to that extent, but as a person I'm utterly uninterested. Yeah, Stannis I don't care about. I'm trying to think who else. I had someone else. I like Asha in the as in Theon's sister. She's Yara in the show. I like her, although certainly I feel like she doesn't always get the best stuff to do, but I think she's a cool character in concept at least.
Getting fingered by her brother on horseback wasn't.
Sorry.
And then Chooch. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have more?
No, that's fine.
I'm sorry.
Can I interrupt real quickly? I just remembered which point of view chapters I never really was interested in, and those were Theon's. Because I wanted to smack the shit out of him for being a jerk. But he's pretty big. Anyway.
And Chooch, bearing in mind that your experience is different.
Yeah, I find it definitely changes over time because there's characters like I didn't really care about Sansa very much because she was just kind of generic, vapid, but she really evolves and grows and is turned into a character I really like a lot now. So characters I love, a whole lot of overlaps. Obviously Tyrion, Arya, and but I think it was Brienne that stood out when I first started trying to think of names. I don't know, she's a complex character, and just how her loyalty and her sense of honor, and think of what she had to grow up with and overcome, and sort of that to become this total badass. She's awesome. The characters I hate have pretty much followed the bad guys through the seasons, I guess, and they've all done just impeccable jobs of making me hate them.
Yeah.
And they're pretty much all dead now.
And how about who you just are kind of apathetic towards?
Yeah, apathetic. Stannis was the one that was the big one that I thought of. And like I said, through time it was Sansa, and then she got more interesting. And there's some others. Dany was pretty boring, marching around the desert for a long time, and definitely she has problems and issues. But yeah, the man Stannis has got to be the biggest meh for me.
See, I thought my list was going to be more controversial than it is, but so obviously Bran and Sam I don't care about. My hates are pretty in the pocket, which is Cersei, Joffrey, and Walder Frey.
Yeah.
But for the people that really intrigue me and kind of really light me up when they're on screen, Davos, kind of like partly because more than anyone, he to me seems like the character swept up. You know, he's caught in something. He's in over his head clearly from the beginning. He's the one. He had far less advantage than any other of these highborn characters, and he's able to kind of keep going and kind of hang in there. And I'm like, I just admire the shit out of this guy. Like,
yeah.
So I just love watching him work. Honestly.
Well, on that note, I think part of what I actually like about him is that he is so loyal to Stannis, and in the sense that, like, I don't like Stannis, and even I want to kind of take Davos aside and just sort of say, really? Really? But at the same time, the fact that he sees all of that about Stannis, but Stannis is his guy. He's a loyal guy. That's who Davos is. And that's what I like about him, even if, it seems like he could be better off serving someone else because Stannis is what he is. But so just at the same time, though, for him to say, look, my fate is aligned with Stannis one way or another, and I'm going to just try to have it be as good as we can make it.
Yeah, I got the question. So we'll get to that in a second. The other ones that I really love, I love the Sand Serpents. Love them so much. I love Jaime. And I'm going to talk about Jaime in a little bit because I have a hypothesis that I want to run by y'all. And then I don't know if I would say he doesn't quite make the cut, but I am super intrigued with Aegon Damphair. and like the whole drowned men business, which obviously you Chooch won't have gotten to. I'm not going to talk much about it.
Spoiler, show spoiler.
I'm not going to talk much about it. Like the whole drowning thing is super fascinating. To me, it's like this weird baptism thing that I was like, oh my god! Like when I got to the first one of those chapters, reading Feast, I was like,
Yeah.
shit, man.
Yeah.
Where
They
was
don't fuck
this guy?
around.
Where was this guy 3 books ago, man? I love this guy. So that's one of the things I love best about the series is that you can be so far down the line, and then boom, here's someone you've never even heard of. He maybe was referenced and I missed it, but like suddenly this like powerhouse, guy that's like got all this stuff and this whole bravura thing going on. It's like it's like, my God, there's a very deep bench here,
Yeah. And we get introduced to that in the same way that we get introduced with Dorn, which is just like you can still have him just drop a complete society, culture, religious order, and like population that you've never heard of before that just show up and they suddenly like steal your eye. And there's definitely some good stuff like that that'll hopefully come up this season, not next season. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long.
Yeah. Chooch needs to get this stuff. This is good stuff. All right. So
He does.
We got a question from Sheriff Bullock. And the question is there a character you would like a POV chapter from that we haven't got one from? And let's start with Viv.
I'm going to have to think about it for a minute.
Okay. We'll come back to you. Does anybody have... Because this is a hard one.
I've got one.
That is.
I've got one.
Okay, we'll start with Christiana, because I couldn't think of one.
I think in some ways it would kind of break the story a little bit because they have too much information that for dramatic purposes is best left unsaid. But either Varys or Littlefinger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those two guys are fascinating, and I would love to see inside their scheming brains. But at the same time, like I was saying, they know too much, and it might be more dramatically interesting to keep us in the dark as to what they're up to. But at the same time, that's who I would like to hear from. And as far as adaptations in the show, the fact that we got to see conversations between Varys and Littlefinger was one of my favorite additions, because that couldn't have happened in the show because we didn't get a POV chapter from either of them. So, or it couldn't have happened in the book, I should say. Yeah. But yeah, that's who I'd like to see.
Absolutely agreed on all accounts and all points. And for characters that we're never going to get a POV from, I would have loved to have seen inside of Tywin's head. That would have been fun. And again, the show was able to give us some stuff that the books did not, because before Cersei ever becomes a POV character, we get to see some really cool scenes between her and Jaime, between her and Tywin, between her and Robert, all of these characters that at that point didn't have POVs.
Yeah.
So they did get to expand upon a couple of really cool things, but I'd just love to see inside of Tywin's head. Even for a short story, George. Go ahead, write one of your short stories. I'll be fine with it. Just let me see. What is he thinking? Does he know?
All right, Viv, have you thought of any?
I think that the only one that comes to mind is something I bitched about in book 1 and in season 1 of our show, which was that I really just wanted Ned's POV in his final scene. I don't think it's a spoiler, it's from season 1, but the scene where Ned loses his head is the one that you don't get it in the book and you don't get it in the TV show. There's nothing from his POV. It's just happening to him, and then he's gone. And I just was like, they left us with the cliffhangering of Jon Snow. The next time I meet you, I'll tell you about your mama. And then, of course, it breaks your heart. But I mean, it really just wanting to know, as he stood there and it's revealed to him, just like it's revealed to Sansa and Cersei and everybody else, like what was going through his mind. Did he see Arya, that kind of stuff.
And Chooch, bearing in mind you've only got one book to draw on, do you?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
No.
And so also in his question, Sheriff Bullock references hot pie. I would think I'd like to see more. I would like to see more small folk POV, because we do have this is very skewed towards the highborn what we get, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get
They're the major
very
players of the game, though.
yeah, but still they're not the sum total of life
No.
here, right?
Right.
They're 1%. They're the 1%ers. They are literally the 1% of this population, right? And they're 99% of our book. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to rack my brain to think if we've ever Davos is elevated himself, but he's low born. But I'm trying to think if there's another.
Like, for example, the Hound is not nobility in any way. He just works for them. And so in that sense, he's. The problem is, in the nature of a story like this, we're not going to follow them unless they're relevant in some way to the plot, right? Which kind of by default makes them not just an ordinary person anymore. But that said, as far as awareness of what's going on with the small folk, I think, without getting into spoilers, I think that's something that's going to come more into the new season.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the name of the books gives you a good idea, because it's pretty much told you what's going on in the world, and right now it's Feast for Crows. So
I mean, that's part of my. I mentioned how I don't much like, specifically your kind of medieval setting fantasy much. Partly because me being the guy that I am, I don't like these stories about restoring the rightful monarch, because that just that milieu kind of pisses me off. I'm like, all right, so we got to get this guy from this bloodline back for justice to be served. Fuck that. Let's, why don't we tear the whole thing down and elect the prime minister, and let's do that instead. Just like I have this big problem with Sophia the First. This is the kind of stuff. These are the shows I'm way caught up on. So Sophia the First, right? This idea that you get this commoner married into the royal family, and she's just the best princess ever, and I'm like, but she's the best. She would have been the best person regardless. Why does she have to be the best princess? She was already the best person. So that monarchic look at it, that it's to this day I still couldn't reverse engineer why this series matters to me, when I've bounced off a whole lot for exactly that reason.
The Dragon Age series of games, I think, handles that stuff pretty well too, just in the sense of having a lot of the same trappings, but covering it in a more interesting way than a lot of the other. Oh, look, we got a little dog behind me here.
Luna. Yeah, I think Davos is pretty much our main speaking point for the 99%, and I think any of the common folk that we do get point of views have elevated themselves. So, for instance, Barristan the Bold may not have started from something. Senior Clegane, I don't really count because he has a last name. If you have a last name, that means you are somebody, and his house has a sigil. Granted, it was his father that brought them up to recognition, so there's that.
You don't think that like Gendry and Varys and Littlefinger, because they didn't come from wealth, they're only.
That was my next thing. Instead of seeing a hot pie POV, I want to see a Gendry POV, because we don't have that.
Yeah.
It feels like we do, but it's all Arya. I would love to see that. And Varys is definitely another one of those brought himself up from the bootstraps kind of a thing. But we haven't seen a POV from him either, so there's that. And I would definitely like to see more of that. And there's definitely a lot of characters that could give us some of that, but we're not getting it, and I don't know if it's because of narrative or, basically, the 1% is running everything. I don't know. It'd be really interesting, but I would love to see more from Gendry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my big dream. My big dream is that Book 7 ends with Arya and Gendry on the frickin' Iron Throne together.
Well, that goes back to George's plan. The talk of George has a plan. Originally, and we'll probably do more on our show about this. Originally, he had a 3-book idea, and recently people have revealed the editorial notes from that. And it's very different from what ended up happening. And he's often said that originally he was going to have a 5 or a 10-year gap in the books, and the characters were going to grow up. But the way that the story has progressed as he's written, that's not going to happen. So in my heart of hearts, originally, Gendry and Arya were going to hook up when they grew up. I was totally shipping that. And they were going to tear down the whole idea of a monarchy, and they were going to say, it doesn't matter that I'm a lady and he's a small folk without a last name.
Yeah.
We're just going to do this. And who cares if somebody's last name is Snow or, because you've got the whole Jon Snow thing in there. So I feel like there's this looming presence of anyone can be important, and I'm waiting for that to happen.
Yeah.
Well.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now in somewhat tangential material, have any of you played the Telltale Games Game of Thrones game?
I've played the first episode, but not the second one yet.
Mm-hmm.
Explain it to us, Dave.
Well, so I installed it the other day. I am a crap gamer, and I installed it. The whole thing is like I think the guidance is you would expect about 2 hours per episode. I've spent 45 minutes playing this thing, and I'm barely into it because I can't even. There's a point where I was supposed to. I don't know if I went down the same fork as you, Christiana, so I may see completely different things. It's a point where I had the character under a wagon, and I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to make this guy crawl. And it says, crawl out from the wagon. And one time I'm swiping forward, and then I'm swiping sideways, and I'm tapping, and I swear I must have got crushed by that wagon 15 times before I got out from under it. I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing with this thing?
In fairness to you, I think on a tablet is not the ideal way to play those. If you had a controller, you'd just push the joystick forward and you'd crawl.
Yeah. But so I will say that what I really loved about this, and I guess I don't know if this is a spoiler for the game or not, but there's a point a couple minutes into it where you realize where you are, and you don't know that at the very beginning of it. And so you're out there and you're a guy in a camp, you're a squire in a camp, and you're seeing the whole stuff. And what I really liked about it is, so I haven't maybe got to this point. I'm sure there will be scenes like this in the series, but for me, it was that this game gave me actually a more visceral sense of just the downtime in the camp, which is, if you think about it, it's a very tiny part of the books, but in the life of these guys, that's 85-90% of your life is just kicking it in a camp, wiping your sword and, giving shit to the other guys and drinking and just waiting. Think about how much of your life, if you were one of these knights, how much of your life is in a camp waiting. And so, for me, that game gave me such a real sense of that, immediately. And then there's a point, I won't say it, because for anybody who plays it, I think the reveal of where you are is probably the best part of the game. Wouldn't you say, Christiana?
Well, I'm going to disagree only just because I knew where it was before I started playing. I knew where it was going to be set. But the other thing is that, if you're not that far in, then I think there's a lot more stuff that happens beyond that. I mean, the whole episode 1 covers a lot of different, several different locations. And so if you're still doing that opening act part, then there's several more scenes to go.
I'm telling you, I'm not even. I just got past the wagon, so I'm not even. We barely made it out. I barely made it out to the woods, and then I can't even remember where I died, but it wasn't.
Oh sure, yeah. So but that just means there's a lot more to go. So what I will say about it that I think is really interesting is it does a lot of the really hard situations like you would expect to find in the books, but then suddenly finding yourself in the position of having to make those hard decisions. Like if you're all of a sudden having a conversation with Ramsay Snow and he says something provocative and kind of insulting, do you stand up for yourself?
Or
is that going to antagonize him? Or is it going to make, if you don't stand up for yourself, does he see you as weak?
Right. It's the way the gameplay works is you'll be in a conversation. There's really not that much you can do in this character, at least the part that I've been in so far. But someone was talking to you, and it'll give you basically 3 responses that you can respond back with it, and then I say nothing.
Yeah. And it's on a timer, so you have to decide
quick. And it's so, it defaults to say nothing if you don't get to it. And it is stressful to know which one of these things, like your lord asks you, the squire, what to do, about this guy that is dead, and you're like, wow, what am I going to say? I've got these 3 answers. I'm like, I don't know which one to say, and I got 3 seconds to decide. It's like, good, this one, I guess. I don't know. And I was like, what I don't know is how much game changes from that. I know I made a decision. I made a decision to go fetch wine with the other guy, which I think was probably the wrong decision based on the skunk eye I got immediately after.
Well, what I can answer that to some extent, because this is not the first Telltale game that I've played. There's also a Walking Dead game that has a season 1 and a season 2 of that. It's similar in the sense that it takes place in the broader Walking Dead universe, but we're not following the characters from the comic or the show, and so it's similar in that respect. And so I've played other games like this one. So what I will say is that typically by the end of the story, you're going to be funneled back down into a couple of smaller buckets, meaning things can turn out differently, but, the 100 decisions that you make in any given episode, not all of those are going to matter very much, right? But what I'll also say is don't think of it like one decision is the right decision and one decision is the wrong decision, because their whole goal is to replicate the feel of Game of Thrones, where lots of times there's probably no good solution. You just have to pick something and go with it and just say, okay, well, I don't know whether I should go left or I should go right now. If I go left, I'm going to have to fight that guy. If I go right, I'm going to, have no food. Which one's better? I don't know. You just have to pick something and see what happens.
I just try to pick the one that I feel like I can stand behind. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm basically trying to play.
that's a great way to play.
Basically trying to be me playing that. It's like, all right, I'm trying to drop myself as close in there as I can.
Yeah.
You guys are selling me on this game. I've avoided many of the tie-in games because the first one that they did on Facebook, I found very boring, and
this
it didn't
one,
fulfill.
yeah.
And this sounds like something I'll have to go look it up.
Yeah, it's good, and it tells peripheral stories to the main plot. Like, you'll interact with main characters from the series, but only as you're only playing as these minor characters. You play a variety of characters all associated with House Forrester, which is one of the Stark bannermen.
I've heard of the game before, and it never sounded this interesting. So
yeah. I didn't go back to the book to search to see. Do you know, Christiana, if that's ever, or does anybody remember if Forrester is ever mentioned in the book, or is this a graft on there?
If I recall correctly, there is occasional reference to the existence of a House Forrester, but we're never shown any of them.
I couldn't remember if it was a complete kind of add-on or if, because clearly there's so much stuff you could add on and never know. But
right. Well, it's an add-on in the sense that they said, hey, let's take that house that they mentioned by name once and then didn't give any other details about. That will allow us to make it be whatever we want it to be.
I'm going to go way back. I missed somebody off my list of people I hate that I have to mention. It's actually been bugging me. I think, considering all the weird stuff and all the heinous acts that happen in this book, you know what character creeps me out the most? Lisa Tully, or Lisa Aaron.
Oh my God. Yeah, we all needed therapy after her scenes.
The whole season, or the whole series, there are so many bizarro nutcases, and she's the one that made my skin crawl every time she was in there. And if you think about it, there's not a lot. I mean, she's not on.
Well, I think what's great about her character that's so unnerving is that ostensibly she's supposed to be your ally, but she's so clearly crazy that you have to walk on eggshells around her. It's one thing where if someone is clearly your enemy and they're a bad guy, you kind of know what to do with that. Whereas someone like Lisa Aaron, she's supposed to be your ally, but she's kind of dangerous and crazy.
Mhm.
So what do you do with that? And so, like in book 1, season 1, where Catelyn has made this impulsive decision to arrest Tyrion and bring him to her sister, but then when she gets there and sees her sister, she's going like, oh, this is not going to go well. But what do I do? She's my sister. So.
All right, so
Yeah, I had a new hate list, Janice Slint.
Oh yeah.
So as a time check, does anybody need to go? Because I know that we're approaching midnight here.
Well, it's certainly past my typical bedtime, but I'm doing okay.
Okay.
There's no,
All right.
I don't have another competing appointment or anything.
All right, if anybody needs to drop off because you just don't, you hit the wall, that's fine. Again, no pun intended, but don't feel obligated to stick with this because this has actually already gone way longer than I was anticipating, and
Luna,
Well, that's just because you haven't talked to us before.
So
Luna seems quite interested in the conversation and not antsy right now, Christiana. So that's kind
Yeah.
of neat. I'm really enjoying your new setup in your new apartment because you get a lot of really awesome Luna shots, whereas in the past you kept having to angle your camera for that.
Yeah.
By the way, House Forrester it's only mentioned in the books in Dance with Dragons, and it's just they're sworn to the Glovers, so that doesn't give too much. And
Well, that's also a later time period than the game takes place in.
yeah, absolutely. And so most of the information that's out there is from the game, which seems really interesting. One thing I did want to note, since we're talking about how long we take doing episodes, 2 hours for each episode, Sheriff Bullock is in the chat there, and he just started a Deadwood introcast, and 3.5 hours is their average. So they have beat us.
Now, Sheriff Bullock knows how many years I've been dying to podcast about Deadwood, and he knows about the fights between PG and I, and I'm kind of hurt that we haven't been asked to be on it.
He did an
There,
open call.
the Facebook group, get on that.
I'll have to get on that then.
okay.
Oh man, Deadwood's such a great show.
So
now-
great.
All right, so let's get back in here with I'm going to go around the horn. Which actors I want to ask 2 questions. Which actors do you most like watching, and which actors do you think are the most accurate representation of the character, bearing in mind that those don't necessarily, somewhat you could have either or both for any of those. So let me start with Chooch. Like which characters really light up the screen for you?
Well, Peter Dinklage is the obvious. Anything he's on, you immediately.
It's compelling.
Yeah. And one, I don't remember the actor's name, but Oberon Martell.
Yeah.
That actor, and I didn't have the character to compare him to. I hadn't read that book. But he absolutely lit up the screen and stole every scene he was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Christiana, how about you?
I think Arya, Maisie Williams' Arya is a revelation. I never would have guessed that they could cast a child actor that could capture her character so well.
Yeah.
Tyrion, of course, is also great. Although when we say accurate to the books, there is certainly the note that in the books he's described as being much uglier than Peter Dinklage is. But certainly he gets the character perfectly. I think in terms of the performance, he's great. Jamie also, I think, is just like I imagined him. The actor really captures Jamie the way I envisioned him, and I don't just mean visually, but I mean in his personality and so on. Tywin, I don't know if he's the same as I might have imagined necessarily, but he's so great in the show.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the ones that come most immediately to mind.
Nuchtchas, how about you?
There are so many of the characters that are so close to the way I imagined them, and so many of them that their acting has changed my image. So, as Christiana said, Tywin is great. In my head, it was always Patrick Stewart. But when Charles Dance came on the scene, yeah, that works. The Queen of Thorns in my head was Maggie Smith. And when Diana Rigg came on the scene, yeah, absolutely. Gwendolyn Christie playing Brienne, I think, is the epitome of that. Because she encapsulates Brienne so well, and just she has the look, which is amazing because she's such a beautiful woman, and they really had to, I don't want to say ugly her up, but Brienne her up. But she has the character so well. Yarp guy, I can never remember his name, Robbie something, who plays Sandor Clegane, fantastic. I love watching Peter Dinklage act. I mean, as people have said, you'd watch him in anything. I mean, he made Knights of Badassdom worth watching. He's fantastic. I absolutely love him. Does not match what was in the books, but is fantastic. And what's his name? Who plays Littlefinger? What's that actor's name?
I don't
remember now. But yeah, he was in The Wire.
Yeah, yes. That's when I saw. So before I watched anything, I saw some screenshot and I went, "Holy shit! Carcetti from The Wire is Littlefinger." I'm gonna not lie.
Too, yeah.
That's part of what motivated me to get started. I was like, "Oh, whoa! All right, well, we gotta get going on this."
Aiden,
I'm looking forward to that.
I didn't know he was an Irish national. The whole time I watched The Wire, I didn't know he was Irish. I didn't know. I think I knew McNulty was British. I did not know that Idris Elba was British. And I was like, that guy's Irish? He's got the best he got a better American accent than some of the Americans.
Well, I mean, look at True Blood. Very few of them are American, and they have the accents perfect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Viv, what do you
Northerner can say?
Viv, what about your actors?
So give me the questions again, because I want to make sure I'm answering them correctly.
So which actors do you most enjoy watching, and which ones do you think do the best job of inhabiting the characters?
To try to not be repetitive, I'm going to say that the actor that played Joffrey was so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I hated that character. How could you not hate that character from the book? Mm-hmm. But he was able to bring it so amazingly well that, I mean, it was 2 seasons. Chooch said, "When he's dead, I'll be happy." I mean, come on, this is a kid, you know? I mean, the actor was just phenomenal. So he definitely was a wild card that you had to watch whenever he was on screen. You didn't know what he was going to chop off or shoot. But I thought he was really mesmerizing. It reminds me of something Christiana said about Ser Jorah, how you did not care about him as much in the books as you did in the show. Was that the right one?
Was that Nutty that said that, I think? Yeah.
One of you said that, but I found the opposite true for me with that particular actor, although I don't think it's his fault. I think it's the blocking or the direction that he gets, because every time he's talking to Dany, he strikes the big swashbuckler romance novel cover pose.
He's totally a drama queen.
Oh, he totally is.
About him, though.
Oh, I hate that. It's like a fucking Old Spice commercial every time. So he kind of makes me just go, eh. And Dany and Sansa have both gotten a lot more interesting. The actresses have just, I think the actress playing Sansa is bringing more complexity to the role than was in the book, and I know that's partly due to writing and direction. And I think that Dany is, I think it's been weird with her because she couldn't find her own voice, so it's hard for you to get mad at them. But I think the actress has done a really good job with what they've given her to reveal about the character. So she's pretty damn compelling, too.
And so we already mentioned one of mine, Aidan Gillen. So we got to episode 3, and that was the first Littlefinger episode, and I was like, oh, yeah, finally. I mean, it was more or less the impetus for watching this now was learning that he was in the series.
Yeah.
And I don't know the guy's name, the guy that plays Jon Snow. I really like him. I think he did an excellent job of kind of conveying the complexity of that character in a way that I didn't necessarily get from the book, right? The kind of, especially in the early going, when he's with the family and then when he's not. So, bearing in mind, I've only got 3 episodes that I'm talking about, so I'm really kind of hampered on this question.
Right.
But I really thought that he did an excellent job of carrying a lot of the. So he particularly had to lay a lot of pipe, a lot of the emotional pipe of the story, and I thought he did it very, very economically. Like it took just a few looks on the face, sold a whole lot of it took the place of a lot of exposition, I thought, and then. The one that kind of lights the screen up for me, even though I don't like the character, would be Lena Headey as Cersei. Yeah. And so I knew she was in the series. I did not know what role she played. And the thing I primarily know her is playing Sarah Connor from the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Oh. I assumed she was Catelyn.
Oh, wow.
I know her as the protective mom who tells everyone what they need to know and is right about everything, but everyone doesn't. But she bums everyone out anyway. And
but that's Cersei too. That's not just Cat. That's Cersei too.
So I just
a little bit crazy.
Well, and with her hair color and her coloring, I was like, she'd be perfect for Cat. I mean, she would be perfect in both roles, honestly.
Yeah, honestly,
and, the one thing I have about the actress that's playing Cat is I think she's maybe not pretty enough. She seems too kind of broken down by life.
Well, that was kind of
in the north.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that was something that I had kind of bugged me the first season was, when I pictured, the Tower of the Hand, and when I pictured, Winterfell and River Run and all these places. I pictured it in a very cleaned up version. You know what I mean? It was too pretty. And so the first season I was like, oh, they're literally walking in shit. Okay, so this is like, all right, I'm going to lower my expectations a little bit. And so that was kind of how it was for me, is just realizing that, and Christiana really helped me with this, I got to say. I used to have a real stick up my ass about, oh, well, they didn't honor the spirit of the book. But you really have led me to appreciate different interpretations in different mediums and seeing how they interpreted what their daily life would have been like in Westeros. Mm-hmm. It made total sense the way they portray it on the show, but it just wasn't all shiny and pretty like in my Cinderella version,
Yeah.
And I say this about Catelyn not being pretty enough, and that is, I'm going to say possibly the first time I've ever said that about any TV adaptation, because 99% of the time, I think they have actors and actresses that are too pretty for the roles.
Right.
If there's a problem, they're way too pretty. I'm like, where are the ordinary-looking people? I mean, even the shows I like there are no ordinary-looking people on The Flash. I'm like, somewhere somebody has to look. There's got to be average and under-average people. It's not just, why is everyone an Underwire model in this lab?
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
There's definitely the phenomenon known as, quote, TV ugly. You know what I mean? It's like when a character is meant to be ugly on a TV show, they are generally above average looking in terms of real life people.
The first time that really freaked me out about this was, you remember the Uma Thurman movie, The Truth About Cats and Dogs?
Yeah.
Where Janine Garofalo, who could not be cuter.
Could not have been cuter.
She is cute as a button, and she's the ugly one. I'm like, someone's calibration is fucked here, because this woman is adorable.
Yeah.
And she's like the hideous. Oh, how can we stand to look at her? I'm like, she's beautiful. What are you doing?
She's overweight.
Yeah.
She's overweight. She can still shop in regular stores. I love how you described her as cute as a button, because in my head I'm like, she's cute as a button.
She is.
That's exactly how I would describe her. For me, I never really thought of Kat not being pretty enough, but I do want to mention, that's one of the POVs that originally bored me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've grown to appreciate it now, but on the first read I was like, ugh, a cat chapter.
So I'm going to bring something up here. I will be very ginger because it contains spoilers. But this is my hypothesis. I'm coming back to my Jamie thing I put a pin in.
Okay.
I am hypothesizing that by the end of it, when we get to the very end, what we are going to see is Jamie and Catelyn taking the exact opposite arc and ending in the exact opposite place. Because in terms of the heroic villain scale,
Okay.
I think they're
Okay,
changing.
I'm gonna have to. I think we
you
need
are
to
on the
stop
verge of some serious spoilers.
because yeah. I'm
Okay.
gonna. We will talk about this another day, I promise. We will even talk
But
about
just
it.
I can take my headphones off.
No, it's not just you though,
No.
baby, because it's yeah.
Dave, if
Okay.
you come to Balticon, we're gonna have a nosh.
Fuck that. We're gonna do an episode. Fuck that.
Well, yeah. So because you're not as far along in the show yet, Dave, there's definitely something that happens in book 3 that they did not have happen yet in the corresponding spot. In the show.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
Not that there's anything to be suspicious about Chooch.
Right.
This is just like all the times you heard about Red Wedding, and I was like, shh, nobody say anything.
well, one of the things that I get appreciation for so much about this is that more than anything, there is no victory that you can win that stays won. Like, think about how hard everybody has to work to hang on to everything they've ever won.
Mm-hmm.
It is what a drag to
Yeah.
be any of these characters. If you think about it, I mean, how many times did they mention how Robb Stark won every battle and then completely screwed up everything?
Yeah.
He could not have been more victorious, and he could not have fucked up everything worse.
His wiener got in the way.
I don't remember where I heard it or where specifically this comes from, but I remember hearing at one point that the difference between a happy ending and a sad ending is just when you stop telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same kind of idea that's been explored a lot in other areas, but just this idea of you got so many fairy tales that end with and they lived happily ever after. But what you really mean, though, is that, okay, well, you have these two people that seem like a good fit for now, and they're in love, or maybe they even get married, but then do they have a happy marriage? Like how do they get along? Does one of them snore and that irritates the other? Does one of them cheat on the other 15 years later? It comes down to real life doesn't have endings in the way that lots of our conventional narratives do.
This is so the premise of Into the Woods.
Yeah.
So basically, happy ending is they're riding off to the Red Wedding, and it stops on the ride there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's another way of saying the thing, on a long enough time scale, we're all dead. So, so now, given that for the time you've been involved with this, what have you kind of taken away? Let me back up and frame this. One of my favorite books of all time is J.G. Ballard's Crash. Not so much necessarily because it's the best book I ever read, or even because it's in a lot of ways it's a hard book to read, but it is the book that when I was done reading, I felt the most different, like the most personally different. Like my way I look at things is different. I have a very disturbing story I can tell you that I don't want to tell on the thing. I'll tell you in person. I'm not the hero of the story, and it is kind of gross. But that's a book that made me different. So to that extent, like with your experience with this property, whether it's via TV or novel, what kind of things can you point to anything in your worldview and kind of your perception that has shifted over your involvement with this? And let me start with who wants to. Let me start with Nuchtchas.
Well, I can definitely tell you that, and I don't know, it's not completely the influence of this book, but it's definitely has a lot to do with me changing and understanding the world and understanding people. But this series also showed me that sexuality is a spectrum. And I will say that when I was younger and in my 20s, I thought things were a lot more black and white, and that controlled how I behaved. And there's some things in this book that a lot of them don't even make it into the series, but definitely show that there is a full spectrum out there. And it definitely, there's a lot of stuff that are in these books that make me step back and say, who am I to judge?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not in their shoes. It might make sense for them. Because in these books, the really neat thing is every character thinks they are doing the right thing. They think they're the good guys. They think that the story's all about them because they're doing the best that they possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody is gray.
You know,
And it's totally relatable.
Yeah.
right. So since I'm so early in this and so early in your podcast, in episode 3, you guys were talking about the part where there's that scene with Jamie and Ned where it sure seems like Jamie is hurt that Ned's not thanking him for doing the dirty work that needed to be done, and realistically should not have even been his job. I mean, he sort of took a hit. He took the bullet for everybody by doing what needed to be done, and then did nothing but get shit for it for the rest of his life.
Meaning the Kingslayer.
Being the Kingslayer.
Right.
And that somebody had to do it. And frankly, it should have been Robert's job to do this. But of course, he couldn't be bothered like he couldn't be bothered with a lot of stuff. And
well, Robert wasn't there yet. I mean, Ned arrived at the city as part of capturing the city, and it was done already.
Yeah. But somebody else should have done it, because if they weren't already enemies, in some bit of kind of game theory, you want to make him somebody. If they liked him better, that somebody would have relieved him of that burden. I bet you.
Well, see that, but well, we could get into the whole logistics of that, though. But see, the thing is, Jamie did it before anyone else from the other side showed up. So nobody else from the other side could have done it.
Right.
And if Jamie had not done it and had just waited, then he would have been seen as, the right-hand man of this crazy king we're deposing. And so that's where Ned sees the whole thing as very opportunistic, is, oh, so you're serving our enemy all this time, and then at the last possible second when we're actually capturing the city, suddenly now you kill your king and you're on our side?
But
That's
he could
the way
have
Ned
he could have
sees
been he could have been in a dungeon. He could have been in chains, waiting for somebody else to do to do some lopping off of important body parts.
I don't think anybody here is going to argue that whether or not Jamie should have slain King Aerys when he did and why he did. I mean, it was a very poignant scene.
I think in Ned's mind, he could have done it sooner. He could have done it before his father and brother were boiled alive.
Yeah.
He didn't have to watch that. He could have done it when other people were being tortured. And truth of the matter, I mean, Jamie carries this thing around, but he did it because his dad told him to.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it was also very emotional for him. Oh, but I don't know how far into the season it goes into where he explains more about that.
It's very complex is the ultimate.
Yeah.
There's so many different influences going into both why he did it and why Ned would think what he did about it and what could have happened differently. I mean, it's a very complex situation. There's not an easy definition of, oh, well, so-and-so should have done X instead of Y, because that would have just had a ripple effect.
I agree with your point, though, Dave, that Jamie did something that needed to be done, and he didn't get thanked for it. He got, shit on for it because he really did make a difference, because people were still listening to the crazy king. So,
well, and the details we got of when it actually went down, at least Jamie's version, is that it was literally the last second was the Mad King was basically commanding the pyromancer to go use the wildfire to burn the whole city to the ground.
Yeah, burn them all.
And so that was the final straw.
Because wasn't the quote that he had been saying that for a day? So it's not like this was a final command. He had just been muttering that for a very long period.
Well, he killed the pyromancer first, and then went after the king. At least that's how I remember it, but I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong.
But it was the Jamie had the information from his father. He knew that the plans were there, and when the king said, burn them all, and all these small folk are going to be killed, from Jamie's perspective, that's when he does it. But if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, you definitely have different views. Like, for instance, as I said, Ned looks at it like, yeah, you waited till we were almost going to win we were winning. That's when you decide to change sides. You couldn't do it before my father and brother were tortured. You look at it from some other people's point of view. It's, well, he was Tywin's puppet. You know, there's all these different perspectives. And the other thing, the thing that I love about these books, and it's in the series as well, the unreliable narrator. How much our memory changes as life goes on.
Well, not even the unreliable narrator. The places where, so I got a fair bit of this in Storm of Swords, where you know the truth because you saw it, and then the unreliable statements made to other. You're watching them lie to each other.
Yep.
And you know which parts are a lie and which parts aren't because they happened on screen and we were there for them. So there's always the point that the memories at any point could be flawed. The dialogue could be a lie. It could be erroneous. It could be misremembered. It's like I'll tell you what, the one part of the thing that most strikes me about this, and in fiction in general, this is what I love best about any fiction, is the point where I love fiction that turns on the point where one character has had enough of another character's shit. And think of, say, Paul Newman in Nobody's Fool, or that Mark Ruffalo movie, You Can Count on Me. This is like the climax is some person has just gone to the well one too many times and nobody will put up with it anymore. And if you think about it, this series is an endless series of those moments. You know, they just happen over and over again. It cost a lot of people their lives at certain points, you know, of just one character has just had enough of another character's bullshit. And anywhere between 1 and 15,000 people will die because of this.
Yeah, well, the moment that comes most quickly to mind when you say that is Lysa Arryn's fate, because it was definitely not Littlefinger's plan to do that so early, but you know, he just got to a point where he's like, okay, you're just going to make this hard. Let's just do this. All right, now, plan B.
Well, and also the different perspectives. You know, we're talking about the Mad King dying. There's this one scene that I absolutely love with Maester Aemon, and he's talking to Jon about, are your vows more important than your family? And he's like, you don't think I struggled? You don't think I struggled when my brothers died? When Egg died and this happened? You don't think I struggled when the Kingslayer beheaded my nephew? And you realize, okay, to everybody else it's this Mad King, but to Aemon, that's my little nephew.
Yeah.
And if you think about anyone in your own family, it doesn't matter what people may say about them. You're always going to remember them as that little kid that was on your knee, and you're going to be like, excuse me?
Yep. True
Which,
story.
you know, again, we've got Joffrey being killed, and that's, as evil as he is, you know, Cersei, that's my baby.
Yeah. Well, you saw it. It was, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. That's another change from the book to the show, I think, is that in the show, it's much more clear that she's aware of what Joffrey is and loves him anyway, just in the sense of, like, well, he's my son. I love him. But in the books, it seems like she is much more in denial about how awful he was.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think I don't know if Martin did this on purpose, but one of the structural things about Storm of Swords, if you think about it, is the fact that I knew there was a red wedding coming, and there were 2 weddings that were happening simultaneously. And I did not know which one it was going to be. And in fact, I backed the wrong horse because I was sure it was the other one. And
wasn't that you too, Chooch? Didn't you think it was the Lannister wedding with red? The Lannister red colors?
No. I thought it was going to have to do with Melisandre. I thought it was going to be gender.
Oh, that's right.
And that it was going to be a reign of blood. And, yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if he didn't know that this was going to be a touchstone of the whole series. So let's put 2 in there so that it's not so obviously telegraphed.
I don't know. I mean, it could be, but I think it also, like, just both plot threads were kind of Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the Marjorie Joffrey wedding was kind of, there was so many other things building to that, whereas the agreeing to the marriage to the Freys had been set up all the way back in book 1. So I mean, the threads were kind of there for both of them already.
Well, there's a scene where the Red Viper is talking to Tyrion, and he is really, like as he's riding to the wedding, and that to me, it was a false tell. In poker, we have this thing called false tell, where you're trying to pretend like you're giving away something you're not actually giving away, and that was a false tell all the way. Because you read it, it was so creepy, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is going to be these guys. These guys are going to be the ones.
These guys.
And I was like, oh, watch this guy.
Oberyn.
Playing that very differently. So, okay.
Oberyn.
So, right,
I miss Oberyn. I miss him more than I've ever missed a fictional character, I think.
It's still too soon. It's still too soon.
Even Ned?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've moved on.
I think Sean, I should probably mention Sean Bean as actors, is that he, with my very limited experience, he was exactly what I was expecting for that character.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
Probably, I would imagine in somebody's head that he was like, if not very number one on somebody's list when they said, all right, who do we like to have for this? He had to have been way up there.
Boromir, of course.
So, okay, so I've kept you all very late. Let me just, very end here, let's just kind of go over, just kind of give me your wrap up, your feelings about, the series and your involvement and doing this podcast and kind of your very deep, what it's done for you and kind of how you feel about having been so soaking in this world for so long. And let me start with Nuchtchas on this one.
Okay, so for me, the world, all of it, Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, all of the Hedge Knight books and comics, which, by the way, if you haven't read those, Dave, get on that. That's awesome. They are, to me, I would say almost as important as Star Trek, which is a huge, huge compliment coming from me. Because Star Trek has changed my entire life. And I think that this has definitely enriched my life for the better. And it brought me, brought me a series of books that I can think about and talk about endlessly for years on end, and did. It's brought me a TV show that I'm really enjoying, even though I know some people that are going away from it. But it brought me a podcast that is super important to me, and I couldn't imagine not doing it. I look forward to it every year, and it's fantastic. I can't say anything but amazingly gushy, awesome things.
All right, Chooch, how about you?
For me, the series itself has just gotten better and better and better. Every season has been better than the last one. When you guys were talking about your favorite book, and I was trying to think of it in terms of my favorite season, but they just get better and better for sure. The podcast-wise has really just been deepening the friendships with the co-hosts, and the time we get to spend together is just the best.
Are you looking forward for the end of the show to read the books, or is it a thing you're champing at the bit and kind of taking one for the team by not reading them, or are you kind of sanguine about that and you can wait?
I go back and forth. Some of it is some of the frustration of people's debates and reading. I think I definitely will end up reading them all for sure once the HBO thing's over. Partially because there's so many differences, there's so many divergences, there's so many things that are ahead in the show versus the books. So it will be interesting to see those differences, and which would probably coincide with the rewatching of the whole series too.
Mm-hmm. And Viv, how about you?
The books I have loved for a really long time. The books brought me a common language with friends that we met at conventions, people that I didn't know anybody that had read the books or other series that I was into. And then suddenly I was in this place full of all these people that had all read the same book, and we could talk about it and loving this character and loving that character. And that was something that PG and I bonded on really early. And so for me, it's one of those things that I've always loved that is something that I can share with friends, either Christiana and Nutty and Chooch, or, you know, Sheriff Bullock, or a certain judge in North Carolina that watches us. But, you know, it's just given us kind of this common experience, the loves, the hates, the disagreements. And the show has given me the podcast, because I don't think we would have done a podcast without the show. And the podcast has clearly some of my very best friends are on here, including my husband. It's brought me there was a scene in one of the episodes, I can't remember which season it was, I don't remember which book it was, that kind of explains a little bit of what it was for me that it may not be for, or it may be for everybody, and I'm just attuning to it because of my own situation. As you know, I've mentioned it, I've got health problems, mainly neurological. And so there's, when Bran fell, you know, I read it so long ago, it broke my heart, but when he fell this time, and he was hampered, and they had to come up with a special way to move him around, and they always had to have Hoda there for him, and then later on, there's other characters that you see that are very sick, and they just, every once in a while, they find a way to bring it back and saying, you know, just because you can't do X doesn't mean that you shouldn't be here, you shouldn't be a part of it, that you're not without value, that you still, you know, memory problems, whatever, blah, 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 that I deal with, people still, for some reason, care about my opinion on some of this stuff, whether it's coming from the mother side or whatever, you know, but so they've given me three totally different things. You know, the books I loved because the books were awesome, the show I loved because it's awesome, but all of them brought me, you know, 4 other faces for 10 weeks, 11. Would we do a pre-show and then we do a post-show? So it was more like 3 months of seeing these faces.
Consumption too.
And then we were doing a weekly consumption too, and so it's a whole quality of life issue for me, which sounds super melodramatic and emo, which is just me if you know me. But and I think it's the kind of thing, like, you know, Nutty says that she loves Star Trek, and it means as much to her as Star Trek. I'm paraphrasing. But, you know, it's one of those things that whatever it is, for whatever reason, it talks to you, and it kind of lights a fire in you that other people see, and it lights a fire in them, and they want to talk about it. I can't tell you how many times I've stood outside of a building talking to a bartender or a friend and getting all, you know, serious and intent and getting into a real fierce debate over whether or not this character should have died or not. And it's just the silliest, most insane thing that we get so carried away with these characters, but I mean, it all just goes back to George's writing, after all.
All right, and Christiana?
Well, so I wonder if the scene that Viv was thinking of might have been the one with we had Osha and Jojen and Mira and
That's
Bran.
exactly the one. Yep.
And Osha is being kind of judgmental over the fact that Jojen is not a traditional man in her viewpoint, in the sense that Mira has to be the one that wields the knife and protects them, and don't you think he should be ashamed of needing help? And she says, some people are worth helping. Anyway, though, I think what's other than just the fact that it's a great story, which it certainly is, one of the things that's exciting about the show becoming a phenomenon even beyond what the books were is it really has become this sort of cultural touchstone that a lot of people have access to and sharing in that way. Because as much as a good story is entertaining to read and experience all by yourself, and it can be still very, very meaningful that way, I think the best stories are the ones... like for me, the best stories are not just limited to what's on the page. They are then, it's the page as a stepping stone to discussion and sharing with people. And I think Game of Thrones has been such a great opportunity to do that as a broader culture. As geeky things are becoming a little bit more mainstream, there's just more broad acceptance of hey, yeah, this stuff is actually pretty cool. But then also, just again, as everyone has said, the podcast has been a very special thing, and watching the show and then talking about it is just one of my favorite things to do. And I got some really special people to do it with.
Oh, what an
I got
excellent
you,
button
baby.
to put on that. Oh. Thank you so much. So thank you all so much. I would not have had the urgency to do this if I didn't. I love. And bearing in mind, I've listened to 4 episodes, 0 through 3, and I am so smitten with this. And again, I'm kicking myself for being so late to this party, but I love it so much, and I love you guys so much, and it's just so great. And so, thank you so much for hanging with me until a fairly unholy hour. But
It's Saturday night, baby. It's okay.
Shots!
I'm telling you, you could not get to. For me personally, this is the ideal Saturday night. This is perfect. It's right in the pocket. So thank you so much. Again, let me make sure. specficmedia.com/podcast/BTW. Is there a shorter URL?
Well, /BTW gets you to the main page.
Okay. Yeah. And for anybody coming on board, or if you watch the show and you don't listen to the podcast, this is the thing. Come join. Just go back to the beginning and listen. It's all there. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you all. And thank you everybody that was in the chat. Let me acknowledge Ken Kennedy, who made a comment about enjoying the game. Thank you so much, Ken. We don't have any other questions to answer, so that's pretty much it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And as always, I love you. Bye. All right.
Love you, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.